petrol prices decreased for the first time in 3 years. Trevor Noah was announced as the comedian to succeed one of the biggest Comedy Central shows in The Daily Show, and AKA just cemented his position in South African music by releasing his critically acclaimed Levels. However, that's all I could tell you about the South African hip-hop scene around that time. Before AKA's Levels, there was no hip-hop record that anybody would be excited for, let alone talk about long enough to be debated. In fact, the last significant hip-hop album to be released was in 2004, Pitch Black Afro's Styling Gel, which in 2014 was still the highest selling hip-hop album of all time in South Africa. Popular music for the youth before that was a battle between different genres of house music and hip-hop, and house seemed to be winning that battle since the end of Kwaito. It seemed more and more artists were moving from being hip-hop artists to house DJs in order to make money from their music. A good example of this was Boza from Squatter Camp. South African hip-hop's only exciting artist at the time was AKA. He was getting the bookings, the shows, the promotion, and the light amongst his South African music peers. His last release was his first album, Alter Ego, which somehow seemed to bring only hit after hit, from his breakout single Victory Lap to his smooth All I Know and the introspective Bang. All the awards were being showered on AKA, from Channel O to the Psalmist. AKA then released the first single, Congratulations, through Apple's iTunes and immediately changed the game. Enter this guy. There was nothing particularly special about that song. It was a pitched down voice of a repeated phrase mentioning the nickname of a beloved car in South Africa, which had been done many times before that. However, it's the way in which it was done. Trap music had recently started to make waves in South African underground hip-hop, almost 3 years after it was popularized in the United States. In fact, people had been listening to trap music since it was first a staple in 2010, when Rick Ross and Waka Flocka made the hard-hitting bass instrumentals a thing. However, South African media hates South African artists sounding at all like the United States counterparts that they play every day. Now, here was a guy who was doing the same thing, but somehow it sounded fresh and South African. Soon enough, while all eyes were on AKA gearing up for his very anticipated Levels, there was a song nagging in the back of everyone's mind. Songs always blow up though, and artists tend to be forgotten under the spotlight of their biggest song. However, when you saw this guy behind this song, immediately you were greeted by the ponytail. Genius, which was made all the more mesmerizing by his stage presence. This man was born to be on stage. For the first time, people were looking at other artists besides AKA in the hip-hop scene. Many were trying to replicate the formula Cassper used, Ricky's Amantombazane and KO's Karakara, which used a Bay Area DJ Mustard type beat with South African vocals. AKA was now, for the first time, in competition with other hip-hop artists since his come-up. However, Cassper's greatest success story was the one that he told a million times. He was independent, which meant that he was not contractually obligated to any company, the biggest three being Sony, Universal and Warner, but there were others such as Galawa Jazzme and Cash Time. This allowed Cassper to release music in an unorthodox way. Before Spotify and Apple Music were easily accessible to musicians, hip-hop artists would release their music for free. This meant it was easily accessible for potential fans. Thanks to the internet, it was 10 times easier and cheaper. Cassper released his second single, Dog Shebeleza, on the 17th of January 2014.
I grew up listening to all these other guys, this Rick Ross, I think I'm Big Meech, right? I don't know Big Meech, right? But I know Dog Shebeleza, right? Who knows Dog Shebeleza, too? Okay. So when I say I'm Shebelez, you go dark, dark Shebelez. I'm Shebelez, you go
dark, dark Shebelez. I'm Shebelez. Dark, dark Shebelez. I'm Shebelez. Dark, dark Shebelez. I'm Shebelez. Dark, dark Shebelez.
It did not immediately catch everyone's attention as people were still getting to know him through the Kusheshe record. The beat was produced by Sean Cray. It was high energy and had an even heavier bass than Kusheshe. However, around March, people started to hear the song more and more on radio and wanted to download it, which made people search for it online. And at the time, you would have seen that it had been downloaded 100,000 times.
I'm Shebelez.
People didn't even know that there were that many people who listened to South African hip-hop, let alone Cassper. Numbers started to matter again. Because of the fake numbers that can be produced by data file hosts, it is now shunned upon to use data file hosts to release your music. However, at the time, seeing that number was marketing in itself. Word started to spread that there was an artist shattering notions about South African hip-hop and its reaches. Everyone was on the Cassper train. You couldn't get away from the song. It was everywhere. Kids were singing it in the streets. Old people were talking about kids singing the song in the streets, and its legendary status was cemented when Doc Shebeleza himself showed up in the music video, metaphorically handing over the baton to Cassper. Everyone and their grandmother wanted to be a rapper and get on this hip-hop train. It is widely debated if Moya by Squatter Camp or Doc Shebeleza by Cassper is the biggest hip-hop song of all time. Remember when I said AKA was about to release his next single and be the first artist to release on Apple's iTunes? Well, that did change the game. AKA was the only South African #1 for weeks and months on end, until that was disrupted by a remix of Ricky Rick's Amantombazane. Other songs started to pop up in the #1. DJ Speedster's Special Somebody and KO's No Fear Freestyle, and even a few underground artists such as Zakwe were able to get their songs on iTunes. When a fan commented that Doc Shebeleza was the #1 song on the internet, AKA responded with, this started a long rivalry between the two, which I will cover in a different video. However, it was clear that AKA noticed that his star was not the only one shining anymore, and it was getting to him. Taking the time to capitalize on the rivalry, Cassper announced that he'd be releasing exactly a month after, which was quick in terms of South African hip-hop. Even dropping an unannounced music video for Tsibip on the same day, actually on the same show as AKA's highly anticipated video for Run Jozi. So came the 30th of June and Levels was released to fanfare. However, there were no numbers to back it up. It was basically up to us to believe that he was the biggest act in South Africa. We couldn't quantify their reach though, because as much as Cassper had 100,000 downloads for his song, nobody had actually spent money on him the same way that people had spent money on AKA. We were not able to compare the two, and we didn't know how except through opinions. Until July 30th, 2014. Cassper had recently released his third single, Pumagim, and appeared on the cover of Hype magazine. Having announced his album not so long before that, people wanted to hear what the rival of arguably the biggest hip-hop artist in the country had to produce. When the 30th of June arrived, it was like any other artist release that we've had in South Africa. The album was a mixture of multiple genres such as hip-hop, dance, house, and kwaito. Cassper had a great understanding of telling introspective stories about himself and a presence on an instrumental that was that of a natural. This isn't an album review necessarily, however, this was a very noteworthy album and arguably still his best album to date. I tend to disagree with that notion and I lean towards Tudo being the best album, but I've digressed. What really caught people's attention was when he announced on V Entertainment a month later that he had sold 10,000 copies. In the United States, you would be laughed out the building, but in South Africa, this was big. He would need 10,000 more to go gold in South Africa. As a measure of how well he was doing, the biggest hip-hop album before that was from a rapper by the name of Zakwe, who also went gold, but it took him over 2 years to reach this. So Cassper dyed his hair blonde and got everyone else in the industry to dye their hair blonde in support of his campaign to go gold. People all over South Africa were dyeing their hair blonde in support, and it became known that Cassper was the biggest artist now, and his album was moving at an incredible speed. Musica and iTunes could back up his claims of his album being the most purchased album in the country. On November 6th, 2014, Cassper went gold. Then went platinum the following year, even using his momentum to fill up the biggest arena in South Africa, the Ticket Pro Dome. At this point, it wasn't opinion. Cassper was the biggest hip-hop artist. Matter of fact, Cassper was the biggest artist in South Africa during this period. Hip-hop music since then has had the same qualities. Artists cause rivalries in order to boost sales, cite Aries and Nasty C. People are trying harder and harder to use more American sounds with South African twists in order to get airplay. This is basically the whole ambitious entertainment formula. And since this period, Apple Music numbers and chart positions are still used to contest the status of different artists no matter how controversial. See the case of Focalistic. Because of Cassper and his actions and rise, we now can contend with the rest of the world.